Virgin girl hid her pregnancy after one night with the CEO. Years later, what he did shocked everyone. You disappeared. I searched for 6 years. 6 years, Bryn. And now I find out you've been hiding my daughter from me this entire time. Garrett's voice cracked with a mixture of fury and heartbreak as he stood in the dimly lit parking lot of the Pinewood Hollow Town Hall. His hands trembled at his sides. The woman before him, the one who had haunted his dreams for half a decade, looked nothing like the frightened girl he remembered. She stood taller now, fiercer, her eyes blazing with a mother's protective rage. I did what I had to do to protect her, Bryn shot back. Her voice didn't waver even as tears streamed down her face. I saw what you were capable of. I saw you destroy an entire community for profit. What was I supposed to think? That you'd welcome a baby with open arms? That you wouldn't use your power and your money to take her away from me? Behind them, pressed against the window of the community center, a small face watched. 5-year-old Presley couldn't hear the words, but she could feel the electric tension crackling between the two adults who shared her amber-colored eyes. Her small hand pressed against the glass, leaving a tiny handprint in the condensation. Is that really my daddy? She had asked just moments before. The question that changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this impossible story really began. Back to a night 6 years ago when a brilliant young researcher made a choice that would alter the course of 3 lives forever. Back to the moment when Bryn Castellano gave her heart and her body to a man she thought she knew. Back to the night that created the little girl currently watching her world reshape itself through a foggy window. Have you ever made a choice in a single moment that changed everything? A choice born from fear, from protection, from love so fierce it demanded you disappear? That's exactly what Bryn did. And now, 6 years later, the man she ran from has returned. But he's not the same man she fled, and what he's about to do will shock everyone, including Bryn herself. If you've ever had to choose between truth and protection, between revealing a secret or keeping it buried, hit that like button right now. And subscribe to Cedar Drama because this story will challenge everything you think you know about second chances, forgiveness, and what it really means to be a family. 6 years earlier, the Seattle Convention Center buzzed with the energy of hundreds of environmental innovators, sustainability experts, and corporate executives gathered for the Pacific Northwest Environmental Innovation Summit. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light over networking clusters and exhibition booths, showcasing the latest in green technology. The air smelled of expensive coffee and possibility. Bryn Castellano stood backstage, her presentation notes trembling slightly in her hands. At 23, she was the youngest presenter at the entire summit. Her research on mycorrhizal fungal networks and their applications for urban food systems had caught the attention of the organizing committee. Now she had 20 minutes to convince a room full of skeptics that her work mattered. You're going to be amazing, her mentor Dr. Patricia Okonkwo had told her that morning. Just remember, you know this material better than anyone in that room. Speak from your passion, not your fear. But fear was precisely what Bryn felt, as the moderator called her name. She walked onto the stage on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The spotlight blinded her temporarily. When her eyes adjusted, she saw row after row of faces. Some interested, some already checking their phones, some openly skeptical that someone so young could have anything valuable to contribute. She began speaking. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each sentence. She talked about soil as a living ecosystem, about the underground networks that allowed plants to communicate and share resources, about how understanding these systems could revolutionize urban agriculture and food security. She showed slides of her experimental garden plots, data charts demonstrating increased yields, photographs of thriving plants in previously barren soil. Somewhere around minute 7, she forgot to be afraid. The material took over. This was her passion, her life's work, the thing she believed could genuinely make the world better. Her voice rang clear and confident through the auditorium. When she finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Several people stood. Bryn's cheeks flushed with surprised pleasure as she gathered her materials and exited the stage. That was extraordinary. The voice came from directly behind her. Bryn turned to find herself looking up at one of the most striking men she'd ever seen. Tall, with dark hair just beginning to show silver at the temples despite him appearing to be in his early 30s. Sharp features that might have seemed harsh except for the warmth in his amber eyes. He wore an expensive suit with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Thank you," Bryn managed, suddenly very aware that her own outfit, a borrowed blazer over a clearance rack dress, probably cost less than his watch. "I appreciate that. Garrett Wolfe." He extended his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing. "I'm keynoting tomorrow on sustainable development practices, but after hearing your presentation, I'm wondering if I should be taking notes from you instead." Bryn's eyes widened. She knew exactly who Garrett Wolfe was. Everyone at this summit knew. Wolfe Global Development had been making waves in the industry with what they called eco-conscious luxury projects, high-end developments that supposedly incorporated environmental sustainability. Some praised them as the future of responsible construction. Others dismissed them as greenwashing, environmental rhetoric slapped onto fundamentally extractive practices. "Your work with community land trusts has been really interesting," Bryn said carefully. "The Portland project especially." Garrett's smile widened. "You've done your homework." Most people just see the finished buildings and assume we're like every other developer. They don't look at the methodology, the community engagement processes, the environmental impact assessments. "I always look deeper," Bryn replied. "What's on the surface isn't usually the whole truth." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, a flicker of appreciation or perhaps recognition. "Exactly. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation over coffee? There's a decent place in the hotel lobby, and I'd genuinely love to hear more about your research." Bryn hesitated. Every professional instinct told her this was a networking opportunity she shouldn't pass up. Garrett Wolfe had resources, connections, the kind of platform that could amplify her work exponentially. But something else hummed beneath the professional justification. Something about the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way that had nothing to do with mycorrhizal networks. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'd like that." Coffee became lunch. Lunch became a walk along the Seattle waterfront despite the October drizzle. The conversation ranged far beyond their professional work. Garrett talked about growing up in rural Montana, how his father had built a small construction company from nothing, how he'd watched corporate developers destroy his hometown's character in the name of progress. "That's why I do what I do," he explained as they stood watching ferries cut through Elliott Bay. "I want to prove you can build, can grow, can develop without destroying. That profit and sustainability aren't mutually exclusive." Bryn talked about her childhood in Eastern Oregon, about her mother who had died when Bryn was 16, about finding solace in her mother's garden after the loss, about discovering that soil and plants and the hidden world beneath our feet held more wisdom than any human system. "My mom used to say that everything grows from what we can't see," Bryn said softly. "The roots, the networks, the invisible connections. We focus so much on what's above ground, the flowers and fruits, that we forget the real work happens in the darkness." Garrett stopped walking. He turned to face her fully. "That's beautiful and profound. You're not just a scientist, Bryn. You're a philosopher." She laughed, embarrassed. "I'm really just a grad student who spends too much time with compost." "No," Garrett said seriously. "You're someone who sees the world differently, who looks for the connections others miss. That's rare. You're rare." The air between them charged with something electric. Bryn felt suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the mist had dampened Garrett's hair, how his amber eyes seemed to see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "I should get back," she said, though she didn't move. "To the conference. There's an afternoon panel I wanted to attend." "Or," Garrett said quietly, "you could have dinner with me. Somewhere away from the conference. Just conversation. Just us." Every cautious bone in Bryn's body screamed warnings. She didn't do this. She didn't have dinner with powerful men she'd just met. She didn't trust easily or open up quickly. Her life was careful, controlled, planned. But something about Garrett felt different. The way he'd listened to her presentation with genuine interest. The way he'd asked follow-up questions that showed he actually understood the material. The way he talked about his own work with passion rather than ego. The way he looked at her like she mattered, like her ideas and words had weight. "Okay," she said again. "Yes." Dinner was at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a Pike Place Market side street. Garrett knew the owner, a round-faced woman named Rosa, who greeted him with a hug and subjected Bryn to a thorough but warm examination. "This one has kind eyes," Rosa announced in accented English, patting Bryn's cheek. "You bring her back, Garrett. The other ones, with their sharp faces and cold hearts, those you don't bring back. But this one, she stays." Bryn blushed crimson as Rosa bustled away to prepare what she promised would be the best meal of their lives. Garrett looked slightly embarrassed. "I apologize for Rosa. She has no filter and a very strong opinion about everything." "I like her," Bryn said honestly. "She says what she means." "Like someone else I know," Garrett replied with a smile. They talked through multiple courses. Rosa brought dish after dish, each more delicious than the last. Homemade pasta with sage butter, roasted vegetables that tasted like they'd been kissed by wood smoke, wine that was probably expensive, but Garrett waved away the menu, trusting Rosa's selection. Bryn found herself sharing things she rarely told anyone, about the loneliness of being a young woman in a male-dominated field, about professors who dismissed her ideas or worse, tried to claim them as their own, about the financial precariousness of graduate school, how she worked 3 part-time jobs to afford rent and tuition, how she sometimes chose between eating and buying research materials. Garrett listened with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. He didn't try to fix her problems or offer unsolicited advice. He just listened, asked questions, made space for her words. "What about you?" Bryn asked eventually. "It can't all be easy, running a development company. You must face criticism, people who don't believe your sustainability claims are genuine." Something shadowed Garrett's expression. "All the time. There are activists who protest every project we propose, competitors who spread rumors that we're just greenwashing, board members who push for cheaper, faster methods that compromise our environmental standards." "How do you handle it?" Bryn asked. "Not always well," Garrett admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm making any real difference or just putting a prettier face on the same old extraction. Sometimes the compromises required to keep the business viable feel like betrayals of everything I'm trying to achieve." "But you keep trying," Bryn said softly. "That has to count for something." Garrett reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture felt natural. "Right, does it? Or am I just convincing myself I'm a good person while perpetuating the same systems that destroy communities and ecosystems?" Bryn squeezed his fingers. "I think truly good people question themselves. It's the ones who never doubt their righteousness that you have to worry about." "When did you get so wise?" Garrett asked with a gentle smile. "When I started paying attention to fungus," Bryn replied. "It teaches you a lot about interconnection and humility." They lingered over dessert, neither wanting the evening to end. When Rosa finally shooed them out with wrapped leftovers and knowing looks, they walked slowly back toward the hotel. The Seattle streets glistened with rain. The city lights reflected in puddles like scattered stars. Outside Bryn's hotel room, they paused. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, anonymous. Garrett's hand still held hers. "I had a really wonderful time tonight," Bryn said. "Thank you for dinner and conversation and just listening." "Thank you," Garrett replied, "for reminding me why I do this work, for seeing possibilities instead of just problems, for being genuine in a world that rewards performance." He leaned down and kissed her. Soft at first, questioning, Bryn rose on her toes and kissed him back, answering. The kiss deepened. Her hands found their way to his shoulders. His arms circled her waist. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Do you want to come in?" Bryn whispered. She couldn't believe she was asking. This wasn't like her. But nothing about this entire day had been like her, and she didn't want it to end. Garrett cupped her face gently. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured or rushed or anything other than completely certain." "I'm sure," Bryn said. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." Inside the hotel room, Garrett was patient and tender. When Bryn quietly admitted she'd never done this before, he kissed her forehead and promised they would go as slowly as she needed. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her hair. "Tell me if anything doesn't feel right." This is about you, Bryn. Your comfort, your pleasure, your choice. What followed was gentle and sweet, and occasionally awkward in the way first times often are, but Garrett made her feel cherished rather than nervous. He paid attention to her responses, her breath, the small sounds she made. He asked questions and listened to answers. He made her feel beautiful and wanted and safe. Afterward, wrapped in hotel sheets, Garrett traced patterns on her shoulder. You're extraordinary, you know that? Not just tonight, though tonight was amazing, but you, your mind, your passion, your way of seeing the world. You're exactly the kind of person this field needs. Bryn nestled closer to his warmth. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Garrett asked with amusement. Someone harder, Bryn admitted. More corporate, less human. I'm very human, Garrett said softly. More than I sometimes wish I were. Humans make mistakes, have regrets, carry damage. Before Bryn could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. You should check that, Bryn said reluctantly. It might be important. Garrett sighed and reached for the phone. His expression shifted as he read the screen. Business, he said shortly. I need to make a call. Do you mind if I step out onto the balcony? Of course not, Bryn said, though something in his tone made her uneasy. Garrett pulled on his pants and shirt and stepped through the sliding door onto the small balcony. The door didn't close completely. His voice carried back into the room, clipped and cold in a way Bryn hadn't heard before. I don't care what the community organizers are saying. The Riverside project moves forward as planned. We've already invested too much to back out now. Bryn's stomach dropped. Riverside. She knew that name. The Riverside Community Gardens in South Seattle. She'd read about them just last week. A beloved 30-year-old community space where immigrant families grew traditional foods, where kids learned to garden, where elderly residents maintained connections to their agricultural heritage. Wolf Global Development had purchased the land and announced plans to demolish the gardens for luxury condominiums. There had been protests, petitions, pleas from community members. Wolf Global had released a statement promising to create a small rooftop garden in the new development as compensation. It was insultingly inadequate, and Garrett was on the phone defending the project. Tell the board I'll handle the optics, his voice continued. We'll make a donation to some urban agriculture nonprofit, get some good press, and move on. The demolition is scheduled for next month. I want it done quickly, minimal media coverage. Bryn felt sick. This was the real Garrett Wolf. Not the thoughtful man who'd listened to her talk about soil networks. Not the gentle lover who'd made her feel cherished. This was a corporate executive for whom community meant nothing more than an obstacle to profit. She dressed quickly and quietly. Her hands shook as she pulled on yesterday's clothes. She'd been such a fool, such a naive, trusting fool. When Garrett came back inside, still absorbed in his phone, Bryn was fully dressed with her bag packed. Hey, where are you going? He asked, surprised. It's barely 4 a.m. I remembered I have an early flight, Bryn lied. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. I should get to the airport. Garrett frowned. You didn't mention an early flight before. Stay. We can have breakfast. Continue our conversation. I really can't, Bryn said, moving toward the door. Thank you for everything. Last night was lovely. She was out the door before he could respond. In the elevator, descending alone, she let herself cry. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have trusted so easily? In her own room 3 floors down, she threw her belongings into her suitcase. The conference had 2 more days, but Bryn couldn't stay. Couldn't risk running into Garrett again. Couldn't face the humiliation of her own poor judgment. She checked out and caught a shuttle to the airport. Sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair for 6 hours until her originally scheduled afternoon flight. Stared at nothing and tried not to think about amber eyes and gentle hands and the way she'd let herself believe, just for one night, that someone like her could matter to someone like him. 3 weeks later, back in her tiny Portland apartment, Bryn stared at a plastic stick that showed 2 pink lines. Positive. She was pregnant. She sat on the bathroom floor, the test clutched in shaking hands. This couldn't be happening. They'd used protection. She was careful. This didn't happen to people who planned everything, who controlled every variable. Except it had. Bryn spent the next 48 hours in a fog. She went through the motions of her daily routine, attended her graduate seminars, worked her shift at the campus bookstore, watered her experimental garden plots. And the entire time, her mind spun with impossible calculations. She was 23 years old, barely scraping by financially, working on a research project that consumed every spare moment, living in a 400-square-foot apartment with unreliable heat and suspicious stains on the ceiling. And she was pregnant with Garrett Wolf's baby. She researched him obsessively, found articles about the Riverside demolition, which had proceeded exactly as planned. Luxury condos were already under construction. The community gardens were gone, replaced by a construction site. Found photos of Garrett at the groundbreaking ceremony, wearing a hard hat and smiling for cameras. The caption quoted him saying something about progress and urban renewal. There was no mention of the families who'd lost their growing spaces. No acknowledgement of the cultural heritage destroyed. This was who the father of her child was. A man who prioritized profit over people. A man who spoke beautifully about sustainability while bulldozing community spaces. A man who'd made her feel special for one night and then revealed himself to be exactly what she should have known he was. Bryn knew she had options. She could terminate the pregnancy. She could carry to term and place the baby for adoption. She could try to contact Garrett and tell him. That last option made her physically ill. She imagined his reaction. At best, he'd see the pregnancy as an inconvenient mistake, something to be handled with money and lawyers. At worst, he'd use his considerable resources to take control, to push her out, to raise his child according to his values rather than hers. And there was a darker fear she barely let herself acknowledge. What if he wanted nothing to do with the baby? What if he accused her of trying to trap him? What if he demanded proof and then, upon receiving it, still rejected their child? Bryn couldn't bear the thought of her baby being unwanted, couldn't bear the idea of Garrett's cold corporate logic applied to their child's existence. She made her decision alone, sitting in her bathroom at 2 a.m. with her hand pressed against her still flat stomach. She would have this baby. She would raise this child alone, and Garrett Wolf would never know. But Portland suddenly felt too close. The environmental circles she moved in were small. Someone might mention her pregnancy to someone who knew Garrett. The risk, however small, was unacceptable. Bryn needed to disappear completely. She found Pinewood Hollow almost by accident, a tiny coastal Oregon town 3 hours from Portland, population barely 1,500, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but newcomers could blend in if they were quiet and useful. There was a failing organic farm for sale, 10 acres of overgrown land with a dilapidated farmhouse and a barn that was more holes than walls. The price was absurdly low because no one wanted it. The soil was depleted, the infrastructure was crumbling. Any sensible person would walk away. Bryn saw possibility. She saw space to grow food and raise a child far from Garrett Wolf's world. She saw a project that would demand all her attention and skill, leaving no room for regret or second-guessing. She withdrew her entire savings, a pathetically small amount that barely covered the down payment, applied for agricultural grants and small business loans under a new name, Bailey Harper. A name with no history, no connection to Bryn Castellano or Seattle, or one mistake-filled night. The transition was easier than it should have been. Bryn had no family. Her mother was dead. Her father had left when she was a baby. Her graduate program was easy enough to defer with a medical excuse that wasn't entirely untrue. Her few friends accepted her explanation that she needed a break from academia, a chance to do hands-on agricultural work. No one questioned Bailey Harper appearing in Pinewood Hollow. Small towns were used to people running from something. As long as you were polite and paid your bills and didn't cause trouble, they left you alone. The pregnancy was hard. Bryn had no health insurance and couldn't afford regular prenatal care. She found a midwife in a neighboring town who asked few questions and accepted payment in vegetables and farm labor. Morning sickness lasted well into the second trimester. Her body ached constantly from farm work. The isolation was crushing, but she was doing it. Creating a life for herself and her coming baby. Building something real and good from fear and heartbreak. Presley arrived on a snowy February morning, 3 weeks early but healthy. Bryn labored alone in the farmhouse with only the midwife for support. When they placed the baby on her chest, slippery and screaming and perfect, Bryn felt her entire universe realign. This tiny person with amber eyes and a furious cry. This miracle made from one night of poor judgment and good intentions. This child who would never know her father but would know she was loved absolutely and unconditionally. "I'm your mama," Bryn whispered through tears. "And I'm going to give you the best life. I promise. You're safe. You're wanted. You're everything." The years that followed were simultaneously the hardest and most beautiful of Bryn's life. Money was perpetually tight. The farm absorbed every dollar she could scrape together. Presley was a colicky baby who rarely slept. Bryn existed in a fog of exhaustion, covered in mud and milk and various other fluids, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But Presley grew into a curious, intense toddler. She followed Bryn through the gardens, her small hands helping plant seeds and pull weeds. She asked impossible questions about why worms lived underground and where butterflies went at night. She found magic in everything, from the way morning dew caught sunlight to the sound of chickens clucking. The farm slowly came back to life under Bryn's careful management. She used everything she'd learned about soil networks and mycorrhizal relationships. The depleted earth gradually regained its vitality. Vegetables grew, fruit trees blossomed. The local food coop started carrying her produce. Pinewood Hollow accepted Bailey Harper and her daughter without too many questions. People could guess there was a story involving an absent father, but the town had enough of its own complicated histories to be judgmental. They saw a young mother working herself to exhaustion to build something good. They saw a bright little girl who knew the Latin names for plants and explained pollination to anyone who'd listen. Bryn found family in her neighbors. Tegan, who ran the local library and became her closest friend. Devon, the town council member who helped her navigate agricultural permits and zoning regulations. Rylan, a retired teacher who volunteered at what became Roots and Wings, the youth education center Bryn started when Presley turned 4. She built a life. Not the one she'd imagined for herself. Not the one her advisors had envisioned when they'd called her research groundbreaking. But a good life nonetheless. An honest life. A life centered on nurturing growth, both in the soil and in her remarkable daughter. And if sometimes, late at night after Presley was asleep, Bryn thought about amber eyes and gentle hands and the what-ifs that could drive a person crazy, well, that was her private grief to carry. Presley asked about her father, of course. The question came first at age 3, prompted by a classmate's comment about having a daddy. "Mama, where's my daddy?" Presley had asked with the straightforward curiosity of a child who didn't yet know some questions caused pain. Bryn had prepared for this. "Your daddy is someone I knew a long time ago. He doesn't know about you because I had to leave before I could tell him. But that's okay, because we have each other, and we have our farm, and we have our friends here who love us." "Does he know my name?" Presley asked. "No, sweetheart," Bryn replied honestly. "He doesn't. If he knew, would he want me?" came the question that broke Bryn's heart. "Oh, baby," Bryn gathered her daughter close. "Anyone would want you. You're extraordinary. Your daddy not being here isn't about you. It's about grown-up things that are complicated and hard to explain." Presley seemed satisfied with that answer for a while, but the question resurfaced periodically, each time with more complexity. By 5, Presley was asking why Bryn couldn't just call her father and tell him now. By 6, she wanted to know if her father was a good person or a bad person. Bryn tried to navigate these conversations with honesty that didn't burden her child with adult complications. "Your father is a complicated person who made choices I didn't agree with. But that doesn't make him bad. It makes him human. And you, my love, got the best parts of him. His curiosity, his intelligence, his beautiful eyes." The truth was more nuanced. Bryn's feelings about Garrett had softened slightly over the years. Distance and motherhood had given her perspective. She could see her younger self's panic more clearly, could acknowledge that she'd made assumptions about how Garrett would react without ever giving him the chance to respond. But she also remembered the coldness in his voice on that balcony, the casual dismissal of community concerns, the prioritization of profit over people. Those weren't assumptions. Those were facts she'd witnessed directly. So she kept her secret, raised her daughter in peaceful obscurity, built her farm and her education center and her quiet life, and told herself she'd made the right choice. The only choice. Until the day an official-looking envelope arrived with the return address of Wolf Global Development. Bryn's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Wolf Global had purchased the wetlands adjacent to her property. They planned to develop a luxury eco-resort. There would be a public hearing in 2 weeks to discuss the project and hear community input. The world tilted sideways. Bryn sat down hard on her porch steps, the letter fluttering to the ground. This couldn't be happening. Garrett's company, here, in Pinewood Hollow, in her safe haven. She told herself it didn't mean Garrett himself would come. CEOs didn't personally handle small-town development projects. He probably didn't even know about this particular piece of land. But 2 weeks later, standing in the packed Pinewood Hollow town hall, Bryn saw him walk through the door. Older now, more silver in his hair, but unmistakably Garrett Wolf. And when his eyes swept the room and landed on her, time stopped. She watched recognition flare in his amber eyes, watched shock chase, confusion chase, something that looked almost like relief across his features. He took a step toward her, and that's when Presley, who'd been coloring quietly in the children's area, came running over. "Mama, I finished my picture. Do you want to see?" Bryn couldn't speak, couldn't move. Could only watch as Garrett's gaze dropped to the little girl with his eyes, his stubborn chin, his inquisitive expression. Watch as he did the math. Watch as understanding and devastation bloomed across his face. "Not now, sweetheart," Bryn managed. "Mama needs a minute." But Presley had already noticed the man staring at them. She looked up at Garrett with frank curiosity. "Hi, are you here for the meeting about the wetlands? My mama says development is bad for the ecosystem." Garrett dropped to one knee, bringing himself to Presley's eye level. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. "What's your name?" "Presley," the little girl replied. "Presley Harper. I'm 5 3/4. What's your name?" "Garrett," he said hoarsely. "My name is Garrett." Around them, the town hall was filling with people. The meeting would start soon. But Bryn couldn't tear her eyes away from the tableau of Garrett and Presley, father and daughter meeting for the first time, neither of them knowing the truth yet. "Presley," Bryn said quietly, "go back to your coloring. I need to talk to this man." Presley skipped back to the children's area, already absorbed in her next artistic project. Garrett stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Bryn's face. The town hall continued filling around them, neighbors greeting each other, council members arranging papers at the front table, but in that moment, they might as well have been alone. "We need to talk," Garrett said. His voice was rough, strained. "Now, privately." "The meeting starts in 10 minutes, Bryn replied, though her own voice shook. "I'm scheduled to speak against your project." Something that might have been pain flickered across Garrett's features. "Of course you are." He glanced back at Presley, who was showing her drawing to another child. "She's mine, isn't she?" It wasn't a question. Bryn's silence was answer enough. 5 years old, Garrett continued, his jaw tightening. "You've hidden my daughter from me for 5 years. 5 years, Bryn. Or is it Bailey now? Which name should I even call you?" Before Bryn could respond, Devin called the meeting to order. People settled into folding chairs. The room quieted. Garrett gave Bryn one last searing look before moving to sit with his development team near the front. Bryn sank into a seat near the back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The meeting proceeded with agonizing formality. Devin introduced the project. A representative from Wolf Global, a polished woman named Andrea, presented their plans. Luxury eco-resort, 50 rooms, farm-to-table restaurant, spa services. Minimal environmental impact, they claimed. Sustainable building practices. Green certifications. The renderings showed sleek, modern buildings nestled among preserved wetlands. It looked beautiful on screen. It looked like everything Garrett had once claimed to believe in. Sustainable development. Thoughtful integration with the environment. But Bryn knew better. She'd researched Wolf Global extensively over the years, tracking Garrett's career from a distance. The company had indeed shifted toward more sustainable practices. Their recent projects showed genuine environmental consideration, but they were still fundamentally about profit, about serving wealthy clients, about development that displaced or disrupted existing ecosystems. When Devon opened the floor for public comment, Bryn stood. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked to the microphone at the front of the room. She could feel Garrett's eyes on her, burning with questions and accusations. "My name is Bailey Harper," Bryn began, the false name bitter on her tongue. "I've lived in Pinewood Hollow for 6 years. I run Roots and Wings, Sustainable Farm and Education Center. My property borders the wetlands in question." She pulled out the report she'd prepared, grateful to have something concrete to focus on. These wetlands aren't just scenic. They're critical habitat for migrating birds, including 2 threatened species. They're natural water filtration for our entire watershed. They're part of an ecosystem that's already under pressure from climate change and development. Bryn looked directly at Garrett as she continued. "I've heard the promises about sustainability, about minimal impact, about green building practices. But I've also seen how easily those promises get compromised when profit margins get tight, when investors demand returns, when the reality of construction meets the idealism of planning." She could see Garrett's hands gripping the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. "This community doesn't need a luxury resort," Bryn said, her voice gaining strength. "We need protection for our remaining wild spaces. We need investment in the people who already live here, not in attracting wealthy tourists. We need development that serves the community rather than extracting from it." When she finished, the applause was substantial. Other community members spoke in support of her position. A few spoke in favor of the development, citing potential jobs and tax revenue. The meeting stretched on for nearly 2 hours. Throughout, Bryn felt Garrett's gaze. When she risked glancing his way, his expression was unreadable. Anger, yes, but also something else. Hurt, perhaps. Confusion, certainly. And underneath it all, a desperate intensity whenever his eyes drifted to where Presley was now dozing in a chair, her head pillowed on her jacket. When the meeting finally adjourned, Bryn moved quickly to gather Presley. She needed to leave before Garrett could corner her, before she had to have the conversation that would change everything. But Tegan intercepted her near the door. "That was powerful, Bailey. Really powerful. I think you might have actually swayed some people." She paused, lowering her voice. "Although I couldn't help but notice the CEO couldn't take his eyes off you. Do you two know each other?" "It's complicated," Bryn said tightly, lifting a drowsy Presley into her arms. "I really need to get her home." "Bailey, wait." Garrett's voice cut through the dispersing crowd. People turned to look. Bryn felt exposed, trapped. She held Presley closer, as if her daughter's small body could shield her from what was coming. "Please," Garrett said more quietly. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Tegan looked between them, clearly sensing something significant. "I can take Presley to the car if you want," she offered. "Give you two a moment." Bryn wanted to refuse, wanted to run. But Presley was heavy in her tired arms, and Garrett's expression held something that looked almost like pleading. She nodded reluctantly. Tegan took Presley, who barely stirred, and headed for the parking lot. Bryn and Garrett stood in the emptying town hall, the space between them charged with 6 years of secrets and silence. "Outside," Garrett said. His voice left no room for argument. "We're not having this conversation with an audience." They walked out into the cool evening. The parking lot was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers chatting by their cars. Garrett led her away from the building, toward the small park adjacent to the town hall. Security lights cast long shadows across the grass. When they were far enough from potential listeners, Garrett turned to face her. The carefully controlled CEO demeanor had cracked. Raw emotion showed through the fissures. "How could you?" he started, then stopped. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. 6 years. Bryn, you've had my daughter for 6 years, and I didn't know she existed. Do you have any idea what that means? What you stole from me. I stole from you. Bryn's voice rose, before she could stop it. You want to talk about theft? What about the Riverside Gardens, Garrett? What about the families you displaced? The community you destroyed? What does that have to do with our daughter? Garrett demanded. With you hiding her existence from me? Everything, Bryn shot back. I saw who you really were that night. I heard you on the phone, cold and calculating, talking about communities like they were obstacles to profit. I was pregnant with your child, and all I could think was that you'd see her the same way, as an inconvenience, something to be managed by lawyers and money. So you assumed. Garrett's voice was quiet now, dangerous. You made a judgment about what kind of father I'd be, without ever giving me the chance to prove you wrong. I made a choice to protect my baby, Bryn countered. Our baby. From a man who I'd just watched prioritize a development deal over human beings. That project wasn't my decision, Garrett said through gritted teeth. The board forced it through while I was fighting a hostile takeover attempt from my father. I spent the next 2 years buying out board members and restructuring the entire company to prevent exactly that kind of project from happening again. Bryn faltered. I didn't know that. Because you didn't ask, Garrett said. You didn't trust me enough to have a conversation. You just disappeared. Do you know how hard I looked for you? I hired investigators. I followed every lead. You just vanished, and I thought maybe you regretted that night with me. Maybe you were embarrassed or afraid or just done. I never imagined you were pregnant. That you were raising my child alone. His voice cracked on the last word. Tears shone in his eyes. I missed everything. Her first breath, her first word, first steps, every birthday, every scraped knee, and bad dream and triumph. You took all of that from me, and I can never get it back. Bryn felt her own tears start. I was 23 and terrified. I was barely surviving financially. I had no family, no support system, and the man I'd slept with had just shown himself to be someone I couldn't trust. You could have trusted me, Garrett whispered. If you'd just asked, just given me a chance, I would have been there. For both of you, I would have done anything. How was I supposed to know that? Bryn asked helplessly. We had one night, Garrett. One night, and then I saw you destroy a community garden. What was I supposed to think? That I deserved the benefit of the doubt, Garrett said. That the father of your child deserved to at least know he was a father. They stood in silence, both breathing hard, both crying openly now. The anger between them was palpable, but so was the grief. For lost time, for wrong choices, for the impossibility of ever making it right. What's her name? Garrett finally asked. Her full name. Presley Castellano Harper, Bryn replied. I gave her my real last name as a middle name, so she'd have that piece of her history. Does she know about me at all? Bryn shook her head. She knows she has a father who doesn't know about her. She knows it's my fault, not yours. I've always tried to be honest about that. I want to meet her, Garrett said. Properly. I want to know my daughter. Every protective instinct in Bryn screamed warnings. If Garrett wanted, he could use his resources to fight for custody. Could tie her up in legal battles she couldn't afford. Could take Presley away. As if reading her thoughts, Garrett added, I'm not going to take her from you. That's what you're afraid of, isn't it? That I'll use my money and power to get custody. He took a step closer. Bryn. I'm angry. I'm devastated. But I would never hurt her by ripping her away from her mother. You've raised her for 5 years. You're her whole world. I'm not going to destroy that. How do I know I can trust you? Bryn whispered. You don't, Garrett admitted. Just like I had to trust that you wouldn't disappear again the moment I turned my back. Just like I'm trusting that you'll give me a chance to be her father, even though you didn't trust me 6 years ago. We both have to make a leap of faith here. Bryn closed her eyes. She thought about Presley's questions about her daddy, about the longing she sometimes heard in her daughter's voice when other kids talked about their fathers, about the fact that Garrett was here, asking rather than demanding, showing vulnerability rather than wielding power. She thought about the research she'd done over the years, tracking Wolf Global's transformation. The company really had changed. Projects focused on affordable housing with sustainable design, community land trusts, urban gardens, ironically enough. Garrett had spent 6 years becoming someone different, or perhaps becoming who he'd always wanted to be. Okay, Bryn said finally. We can arrange supervised visits. We'll go slowly. Let Presley get to know you without overwhelming her. Garrett's entire body sagged with relief. Thank you. God, Bryn, thank you. But I need something from you first, Bryn continued. Cancel this wetlands project. Prove to me that you meant what you said about changing, that communities matter more than profit. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. That's not entirely my decision anymore. I have board members, investors, contracts already signed. Then fight for it, Bryn challenged. The way you said you fought to restructure the company. Show me that the man asking to be part of our daughter's life is someone I want her to learn from. Garrett met her eyes. Okay, I'll try. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I'll try. They stood in the darkness, the town hall lights casting long shadows between them. 6 years of separation and secrets hung heavy in the air, but something else existed there too. A tentative possibility, the fragile beginning of a bridge across the chasm. When is good for me to see her again? Garrett asked. Tomorrow? I'm staying at the inn on Main Street. I can come to your farm, or we can meet somewhere neutral, whatever makes you comfortable. Tomorrow's Sunday, Bryn said. We usually spend the morning working in the gardens, then have lunch. You could come around 11. Meet her in a context where she's comfortable. I'll be there, Garrett promised. And Garrett, Bryn added as he turned to leave. She's smart, curious. She's going to ask questions, hard questions. Be prepared for that. She gets that from her mother, Garrett said with the ghost of a smile. I'll be ready. Bryn watched him walk back to his car. When he drove away, she stood alone in the park for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The careful life she'd built was cracking open. There was no going back to the safety of secrets. Tegan was waiting in Bryn's truck with a sleeping Presley strapped into her car seat. So, Tegan said carefully as Bryn climbed into the driver's seat. Want to tell me what that was about? Bryn gripped the steering wheel. That was Presley's father. He just found out she exists. Tegan's eyes went wide. Holy hell, Bailey. Or is it Bryn? She shook her head. You know what? We can unpack the name thing later. Is he going to cause problems? Do you need a lawyer? Because my cousin practices family law in Portland, and she's a shark. I don't think so, Bryn said slowly. I think he just wants to know his daughter. And maybe that's fair. Maybe I've been protecting her from a threat that doesn't actually exist anymore. Or maybe you've been protecting yourself, Tegan said gently, from having to share her, from having to face him, from admitting you might have been wrong. Bryn turned to her friend. When did you get so insightful? I read a lot of self-help books, Tegan replied with a shrug. Comes with working at a library, so what happens now? Now, Bryn said, starting the truck. Now I go home and figure out how to tell my 5-year-old that her father is coming to visit tomorrow. That her whole world is about to change. That night, after putting Presley to bed, Bryn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink. The farmhouse was quiet except for the old building's familiar creaks and the distant sound of the ocean. She'd always loved this house, its worn wood floors and drafty windows. It had been her refuge, her fresh start. Now it felt like a fortress about to be breached. She pulled out an old shoebox from the back of her closet. Inside were the few remnants of that night in Seattle. The conference program with her presentation listed, a napkin from Rose's restaurant, a blurry photo someone had taken of the presenters that captured Garrett in the background, and a positive pregnancy test, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Bryn had kept these things hidden, never quite able to throw them away. Evidence of the night that changed everything. Proof that it had been real. Not just a dream or nightmare her mind had invented. She looked at the photo of Garrett, barely visible in the background. He'd been 32 then, on the cusp of transforming his company, fighting battles she hadn't known about. And she'd been 23, naive enough to trust a stranger but not wise enough to give him a chance to explain. Could she have handled it differently? Absolutely. Should she have told him about the pregnancy? Probably, but she'd done what she thought was right with the information and emotional state she'd had at the time. The question wasn't whether her choice 6 years ago had been wrong. The question was what choice she'd make now. The next morning, Bryn woke Presley gently. Sweetheart, we need to talk about something important. Presley rubbed her eyes and sat up. Did I do something wrong? No, baby, not at all. Bryn sat on the edge of the bed. Remember how you sometimes ask about your daddy, about why he's not here? Presley nodded, suddenly very awake. Well, something unexpected happened. Your daddy didn't know about you because I moved away before I could tell him I was pregnant. But yesterday, he found out, and he wants to meet you." Presley's eyes went enormous. "My daddy is here?" "In Pinewood Hollow?" "Yes," Bryn confirmed. "He's coming to visit this morning. His name is Garrett. He's a good man, even though he and I have some complicated history, and he very much wants to know you." "Is he going to stay?" Presley asked. "Is he going to live with us?" "I don't know what's going to happen," Bryn admitted. "This is all very new, but I want you to know that no matter what, you're safe and loved. Nothing's going to change how much I love you or how important you are." "Do I have to call him Daddy?" Presley asked. "You can call him whatever feels right to you," Bryn replied. "Garrett is fine, or you can ask him what he'd like. There's no rules here, sweetie. We're all just figuring this out together." Presley was quiet for a moment, processing. "Mama, why do you look sad?" "Because this is complicated, honey. I'm happy you'll get to know your father, but I'm also scared. Scared of things changing. Scared I made mistakes. Scared of a lot of things." Presley hugged her fiercely. "It's okay to be scared, Mama. You tell me that all the time." Bryn laughed through unexpected tears. "You're right. I do tell you that. I guess I need to take my own advice." They spent the morning doing normal Sunday tasks. Feeding the chickens. Checking the garden beds. Harvesting vegetables for the week. But Bryn's attention kept drifting to the driveway, watching for Garrett's car. He arrived exactly at 11. Bryn watched from the garden as he parked and climbed out. He dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, but he still carried himself with that unconscious authority. 6 years had added more silver to his hair, fine lines around his eyes. He looked distinguished and tired and nervous. Presley stood beside Bryn, uncharacteristically quiet. She gripped her mother's hand tightly as Garrett approached. "Hi," Garrett said softly. He crouched down to Presley's level, just as he had at the town hall. "Presley, right? It's nice to see you again." "You're my daddy," Presley stated. It wasn't a question, but her voice held uncertainty. "I am," Garrett confirmed. His voice was gentle. "I know this is probably strange and maybe a little scary. It's strange for me, too. I just found out yesterday that I have a daughter, and I'm still trying to believe how lucky I am." "Why didn't you know?" Presley asked with a child's blunt curiosity. "Didn't Mama tell you?" Garrett glanced at Bryn. "That's complicated. And it's not your mama's fault or my fault. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that seem right at the time but turn out to be hard later. Your mama was trying to protect you. I was far away and didn't know I needed to be here. But now I know. And I'd really like to spend time with you if that's okay." "What do you want to do?" Presley asked. "Whatever you want," Garrett replied. "Your mama said you work in the gardens on Sunday mornings. Could you show me what you do? I don't know very much about gardening." Presley's grip on Bryn's hand loosened slightly. "You don't know about gardening? But you're a grown-up." "I know about buildings and construction," Garrett said. "But plants? They're kind of mysterious to me." "I can teach you," Presley said, her natural teacher instincts overcoming her shyness. "Mama says everyone should know how to grow food. It's important for food security and environmental sustainability." Garrett's eyes met Bryn's over their daughter's head. "She definitely gets that from you," he said quietly. "Actually," Bryn replied, "she gets the teaching impulse from you. You were always good at explaining things, at making complex ideas accessible." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition that Bryn was trying to build bridges rather than walls. What followed was one of the strangest and sweetest mornings of Bryn's life. She watched from a slight distance as Presley led Garrett through the garden beds, explaining crop rotation and companion planting with the seriousness of a professor. Garrett listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "So if I plant basil next to tomatoes, they help each other grow?" Garrett asked. "Exactly," Presley said. "And marigolds keep away bad bugs. Everything in a garden is connected, like a community." "That's beautiful," Garrett said softly. "You're very smart, Presley." "I know," Presley replied without arrogance. "Mama says intelligence is a gift, so we have to use it to help people." Bryn saw Garrett's shoulders shake slightly. Was he crying? No, she realized. He was laughing. Not mocking laughter, but the delighted kind that came from unexpected joy. Your mama is very wise, Garrett said. At lunch, Presley's questions became more direct. They sat at the farmhouse table, eating sandwiches and vegetables from the garden. Presley studied Garrett with frank curiosity. "Do you have other kids?" she asked. "No," Garrett replied. "You're my only child." "Are you married?" "No. I was married a long time ago, before I met your mother. But we got divorced." "Why did you get divorced?" Presley asked. Bryn started to intervene, but Garrett shook his head slightly. "Because we wanted different things from life," he explained. "And we didn't love each other the way people should when they're married. It's sad, but sometimes it's better to separate than to stay together when you're not right for each other. Like Mama and you," Presley said. "That's different," Garrett said carefully. "Your mama and I weren't together long enough to know if we were right for each other. We met, we had a nice time, and then circumstances separated us. And then you came along, which is the best thing that's ever happened to me, even if I only just found out about it." "Do you have a job?" Presley continued her interrogation. "I do," Garrett said. "I run a company that builds things, buildings, parks, sometimes whole neighborhoods." "Mama says development is bad for the environment," Presley announced. Bryn flushed. "Presley, that's not exactly what I said." But Garrett nodded seriously. "Your mama's right to be concerned. A lot of development is bad for the environment. That's why I try very hard to build things in ways that don't hurt the earth, though sometimes I don't get it right, and people like your mama have to point out my mistakes so I can do better." "Are you going to build on the wetlands?" Presley asked. "Because the wetlands are important bird habitat. We counted 7 species there last month. I'm trying to figure that out right now," Garrett admitted. "It's complicated because other people are involved in the decision, but your mama asked me to cancel the project, and I'm going to try very hard to make that happen." "Good," Presley said with satisfaction. She took a bite of her sandwich. "You can stay for dinner if you want. Mama makes really good soup on Sundays." Garrett looked to Bryn, question in his eyes. She nodded. "Dinner would be nice," she said. After lunch, Presley asked if Garrett wanted to see her room. Bryn followed them upstairs, watching as Presley showed off her drawings, her collection of interesting rocks, her books about plants and animals. "This is my favorite," Presley said, pulling out a drawing. "It's a mycorrhizal network. That's how plants talk to each other through their roots." "It's beautiful," Garrett said, studying the colorful artwork. "You're really talented." "Mama helps me," Presley said. "She knows everything about plants." "I remember," Garrett said softly. "That's how we met. She was giving a presentation about underground root systems, and I thought it was the most interesting thing I'd ever heard." "Did you love her?" Presley asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. Bryn froze in the doorway, her breath caught. Garrett looked at Bryn, then back at Presley. "I didn't know her long enough to call it love," he said honestly, "but I thought she was special, brilliant, and kind, and unlike anyone I'd ever met. I wanted to get to know her better, but life got in the way." "And now," Presley pressed. "Now," Garrett said slowly, "I'm trying to get to know both of you, and hoping you'll give me that chance." Satisfied, Presley moved on to showing him her terrarium, but Bryn remained in the doorway, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The day stretched into evening. Garrett stayed for dinner as promised. He insisted on helping clean up afterward, despite Presley's protests that guests didn't have to do dishes. "I'm not really a guest, though, am I?" Garrett said gently. "I'm family, and family helps." Bryn watched him at her sink, washing vegetables grown in her garden, in her kitchen, with their daughter coloring at the table behind them. The domesticity of the scene felt surreal. "She's amazing," Garrett said quietly. "You've done such an incredible job raising her." "She's had a good life," Bryn replied. "It wasn't always easy, but we've had a good life." "I can see that," Garrett said. "This place, what you've built here, it's exactly what you talked about that night in Seattle. Using your knowledge to create something sustainable and beautiful, teaching the next generation. You made your vision real, out of necessity," Bryn said. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Garrett countered. "You could have contacted me." But you chose to do this alone, to prove you could, and you succeeded. There was no accusation in his voice now, just acknowledgement. Bryn felt some of her defensive walls lower slightly. I was so scared, she admitted, of being a bad mother, of failing her, of you taking her away, of so many things. I understand fear, Garrett said. I've made a lot of choices out of fear. Some of them were the wrong choices. Like Riverside Gardens, Bryn said. Like Riverside Gardens, he agreed. That haunted me, Bryn. After you left, I couldn't stop thinking about what you'd said. About sentimentality versus bottom lines. About communities versus profit. It took time, but I restructured the entire company. It cost me board members and investors and a lot of money, but I needed to become someone I could respect. Why? Bryn asked. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to be worthy of the woman who saw potential in me that night. Even if I never saw her again, I wanted to become the person she believed I could be. Before Bryn could respond, Presley appeared at Garrett's side. Are you leaving soon? I should, Garrett said. It's getting late. And you probably have school tomorrow. Will you come back? Presley asked. If your mama says it's okay, Garrett replied, looking to Bryn. You can come back, Bryn said. We'll figure out a schedule. Maybe you could come for dinner a couple nights a week? I'd like that very much, Garrett said. At the door, Presley surprised everyone by hugging Garrett. It was brief and slightly awkward, but genuine. Goodbye, she said. Thank you for learning about gardens. Thank you for teaching me, Garrett replied, his voice rough with emotion. I learned a lot today. After Presley went inside, Garrett and Bryn stood on the porch. The evening was cool, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Thank you, Garrett said, for today, for giving me a chance. I know I don't deserve it. We both made mistakes, Bryn replied. I'm trying to make better choices now. So am I, Garrett said, starting with the wetlands project. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. I can't guarantee the outcome, but I'm going to fight to cancel it. What will that cost you? Bryn asked. Probably several board members and investors, Garrett said. But I've restructured before. I can do it again. Why? Bryn asked. Why would you risk your company? Because, Garrett said simply, I want to be the father Presley deserves, and the man you once thought I could be. If that means walking away from a profitable development to protect wetlands, then that's what I do. He left then, driving back toward town. Bryn stood on her porch long after his taillights disappeared, thinking about choices and second chances and the strange, winding paths that led people back to each other. If this story is touching your heart, please like and subscribe to Cedar Drama. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for healing. Comment below with your thoughts. We read every single one. The next week unfolded with careful choreography. Garrett came for dinner Tuesday and Thursday. He attended Presley's school play on Wednesday, sitting beside Bryn in the two small auditorium chairs. He helped with weekend garden work, learning to tell weeds from seedlings, getting soil under his expensive fingernails, and slowly, tentatively, Presley began to let him in. She started calling him Garrett Dad, then just Dad, testing the word like a new flavor. She asked if he could read her bedtime stories sometimes. She showed him her favorite spots on the farm, the places where she'd seen deer or found interesting mushrooms. Bryn watched this unfold with complicated emotions. Joy that Presley was getting to know her father, fear of what it meant for their small family unit, grief for the years they'd all lost, and something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name when she caught Garrett's eye across the dinner table or when their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same dish. True to his word, Garrett called an emergency board meeting about the wetlands project. He returned to Pinewood Hollow 3 days later looking exhausted but triumphant. The project is canceled, he told Bryn over coffee while Presley was at school. I'm donating the land to create a protected conservation area. The board wasn't happy. I lost 2 members and a major investor. Garrett, Bryn started, but he held up a hand. It was the right thing to do, he said, and honestly, it felt good. Reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. Not to maximize profit, but to create spaces that serve communities and protect the environment. What about your company? Bryn asked. Will it survive this? Garrett smiled. I've weathered worse. And I'm restructuring again, shifting focus entirely to affordable, sustainable housing and community projects. Lower profit margins, but higher purpose. That's going to be hard, Bryn observed. Most worthwhile things are, Garrett replied. He paused. I'm also stepping back from day-to-day operations, promoting my COO to CEO. I'll stay on the board, handle strategy and vision, but I won't be running the company anymore. Bryn's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. Why? Because I missed 5 years of Presley's life, Garrett said. I'm not missing any more. CEOs work 80-hour weeks. Board members can work remotely, set their own schedules. I want to be present for school plays and science fairs and regular dinners. I want to be her father, not an occasional visitor. Where will you live? Bryn asked carefully. I'm looking at properties in Pinewood Hollow, Garrett admitted. Small house, nothing fancy. Close enough to be part of Presley's life, but far enough to give you space. If that's okay with you. Bryn set down her mug. Her hands were shaking slightly. You're really doing this. Restructuring your entire life around a daughter you just met. I'm doing this because she's my daughter and I love her, Garrett said simply. Because every day I spend with her, I realize what I almost lost. What I would have lost if you hadn't stayed in Pinewood Hollow, if I hadn't happened to come here, if 1,000 small chances hadn't aligned. What about us? Bryn heard herself ask. The question escaped before she could stop it. What are we doing here, Garrett? Because it feels like more than just co-parenting. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what we're doing, he finally said. I know I think about you constantly. I know, seeing you with Presley, watching you garden, listening to you talk about soil networks like they're the most fascinating thing in the world, it reminds me why I fell for you that night in Seattle. We barely knew each other, Bryn protested weakly. Maybe, Garrett conceded. Or maybe we knew each other exactly enough. Enough to create something beautiful. Enough to never quite forget. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'm not asking for anything, Bryn. I'm not pressuring or demanding. I just want you to know that if you ever wanted to explore what this could be, I'm here. I'm all in. For Presley, yes, but also for you. Bryn's throat was tight. I'm scared. I know, Garrett said gently. I'm scared too. Scared of screwing this up. Scared of hurting you or Presley. Scared that I'm not good enough for either of you. You're good enough, Bryn said. You've proven that. The way you've shown up for her, for us. The sacrifices you've made. The way you've listened and learned and tried to be better. That's all any of us can do. Is it enough for you to consider giving us a chance? Garrett asked. Not today or tomorrow, but someday. When you're ready, if you're ever ready. Bryn looked at their joined hands. 6 years ago, she'd held this hand for one night and then run. Now, here it was again, offering not just passion but partnership, not just romance but commitment, not just promises but proof. Ask me again in 6 months, she said softly. After we've navigated some school years and holidays and real life, after we've had our first disagreement about parenting, after we've seen each other at our worst, not just our best. That's fair, Garrett said. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. I can wait. I've gotten pretty good at waiting for things that matter. The months that followed were both mundane and extraordinary. Garrett found a small cottage 3 blocks from Bryn's farm. He set up a home office and learned to work remotely. He figured out the rhythms of elementary school schedules and carpools. He became a regular at the local diner and the farmer's market. Pinewood Hollow, initially skeptical of the wealthy CEO, gradually accepted him, particularly after he not only canceled the wetlands project but funded a community center expansion and established a scholarship fund for local students interested in environmental studies. He's not so bad, Tegan admitted to Bryn one afternoon. For a reformed corporate raider, he's trying, Bryn replied. That's all I can ask. Presley bloomed with her father's presence. She taught him to identify bird calls and showed him how to make compost tea. He taught her about architectural design and took her to construction sites of his company's community projects. They developed their own inside jokes and traditions. But they also hit rough patches. The first came when Garrett wanted to buy Presley an expensive microscope for her birthday. "She's 6. Bryn protested. "That's too extravagant. She's interested in biology," Garrett countered. "Why not support that with quality tools?" "Because I don't want her growing up thinking money solves everything," Bryn shot back. "Or that love equals expensive gifts," they'd argued. Their first real fight. Garrett's jaw had tightened with frustration. Bryn's voice had risen with fear that he'd spoil their daughter, change her values. In the end, they'd compromised. A good but not top-of-the-line microscope. A donation to Presley's school science program in her name. A conversation with Presley about gratitude and perspective. "This is hard," Garrett had admitted after they'd worked through it. "Learning to parent together, respecting your choices when I have different instincts." "Welcome to parenthood," Bryn had replied. "It's all hard. We just do our best." The second rough patch came when Garrett's parents wanted to meet Presley. Warren and Diane Wolfe descended on Pinewood Hollow like a well-dressed storm, full of opinions and questions and barely concealed judgment of Bryn's choices. "You kept our granddaughter from us," Diane said tightly over a tense dinner. 6 years we could have known her." "I kept her from everyone," Bryn replied, struggling to stay calm. "I was protecting her the only way I knew how. By running away," Warren said. "By making decisions that weren't just yours to make." Garrett had intervened, his voice firm. "She made the best choice she could with the information she had. I won't have you making her feel worse about it. We're moving forward, not dwelling on the past." But the visit left Bryn shaken. Reminded her that Garrett came from a world of expectations and resources that could overwhelm her small life. Reminded her that his family had power and opinions about how Presley should be raised. Garrett had found her crying in the garden after his parents left. "I'm sorry," he'd said. "They're judgmental and controlling, and I should have prepared you better." "They're not wrong, though," Bryn had replied. "I did keep their granddaughter from them. I made choices that affected a lot of people." Garrett had knelt in the soil beside her. "You made choices to protect your child. That's what good parents do. My parents, they don't always understand that love looks like protection sometimes, not just provision." Through it all, Presley remained their North Star. When decisions got complicated, they asked what was best for her. When disagreements arose, they worked through them because she deserved parents who could cooperate. When fear threatened to pull them apart, her laughter and questions and fierce love pulled them back together. 6 months after Garrett's initial question, they stood in the garden on a cool spring evening. Presley was having a sleepover at a friend's house, giving them rare time alone. "It's been 6 months," Garrett said quietly. "You told me to ask again in 6 months." "I remember," Bryn replied. "We've had disagreements," Garrett continued. "We've seen each other frustrated and tired and overwhelmed. We've navigated my parents and your protective instincts and Presley's needs. We've done real life." "We have," Bryn agreed. "So I'm asking again," Garrett said. "Will you give us a chance? Not as co-parents or friends, but as something more. As people who might build a life together instead of just parallel lives centered on our daughter." Bryn looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd restructured his company to align with his values, who'd given up a CEO position to be present for his daughter, who'd learned about composting and bird migration and mycorrhizal networks because they mattered to his child, who'd fought with his own parents to defend Bryn's choices, who'd shown up day after day even when it was hard. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to try." Garrett's smile was incandescent. "Yeah? Yeah." Bryn laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm still scared. I still have trust issues. I'm still going to be overprotective and stubborn. And I'm still going to make mistakes," Garrett replied. "I'm still learning how to be a parent and a partner. I'm still figuring out how to balance my work and this life. But I want to figure it out with you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It felt both familiar, like coming home to something she'd lost, and new, like discovering something she'd never quite had before. When they broke apart, Bryn said, "We're doing this backwards, you know. Most people date before they have a kid together. We've never done anything the traditional way," Garrett pointed out. "Why start now?" "Fair enough," Bryn said. They stood in the garden, surrounded by growing things, under a sky full of stars. Somewhere in town, their daughter was laughing with friends, safe and loved and whole. The farm stretched around them, proof of what could grow from difficult soil with patience and care. We should tell Presley, Bryn said. When she gets home tomorrow, she deserves to know. How do you think she'll react? Garrett asked. Bryn smiled. She'll probably say she knew all along. That kid doesn't miss anything. She gets that from you, Garrett said. Actually, Bryn replied, I think she gets that from both of us. A year later, they stood in the same garden for a very different reason. Presley, now 7, scattered wildflower petals while a small gathering of friends and family watched Bryn and Garrett exchange vows. The wedding was simple. No fancy venue or expensive production. Just the farm, decorated with flowers from their garden and lights strung between trees. Just the people who mattered. Tegan as maid of honor. Garrett's business partner as best man. Presley as flower girl and ring bearer and general scene stealer. I promise to listen, even when it's hard, Garrett said, his vows handwritten and sincere. I promise to choose us over profit, presence over prestige. I promise to tend our family like Bryn tends this garden with patience and care and attention to growth. I promise to trust, even when I'm scared, Bryn replied. I promise to let you in. To share this life we've built instead of guarding it. I promise to tend our family with honesty and hope, and the understanding that the best things grow from what we nurture together. When the officiant pronounced them married, Presley whooped with joy. That's my mama and my dad, she announced to everyone. We're a real family now. We've always been a real family, sweetheart, Bryn said, pulling her daughter into the embrace with Garrett. We've just been figuring out what that looks like. That night, after guests had left and Presley was asleep, Bryn and Garrett sat on their porch swing, Bryn's head on his shoulder. Thank you, Garrett said quietly. For what? Bryn asked. For that night 6 years ago, he replied. For Presley. For giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. For building this beautiful life and then letting me be part of it. Thank you, Bryn countered, for searching for me. For not giving up. For becoming someone worthy of trust. For proving that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be permanent. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one. Inside the house, their daughter slept peacefully. Around them, the farm settled into its nighttime rhythms. In the distance, the wetlands Garrett had protected teemed with life. I spent 6 years running from fear, Bryn said softly. Fear that turned out to be a phantom. The real Garrett wasn't the man I fled from. He was the man trying to become worthy of being found. And I spent 6 years searching, Garrett replied. Not just for you, but for purpose beyond profit. For work that mattered, for a version of myself I could respect. Bryn turned to face him. We can't reclaim lost time, but we can choose how we spend the time we have left. Garrett kissed her forehead. Then I choose this. Every day, I choose us. All of us. Inside, Presley stirred in her sleep, dreaming of gardens and families and the interconnected roots that held everything together, dreaming of her mother's strength and her father's transformation and the love that had brought them all home. And in the morning, they would wake together. Not perfect, but present. Not without scars, but willing to heal. Not fearless, but choosing courage anyway. A family built from secrets and silence and second chances. A family that proved love isn't about perfect beginnings, but about imperfect people making the perfect choice to keep choosing each other, day after day after day. Thank you for joining us on Bryn and Garrett's journey. If this story reminded you that healing is always possible, that forgiveness can transform lives, and that family comes in many beautiful forms, please hit that like button and subscribe to Cedar Drama for more stories that will touch your heart and change your perspective. Drop a comment sharing your biggest takeaway from this story. Remember, it's never too late to choose love, to choose truth, to choose the family you're meant to build. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.